Hello YouTube and welcome back to Guillotine Games. I was just about to expand this particular facility and I thought it was a good time to take a few minutes and just put together a quick video to talk about aluminum processing. Aluminum processing is a challenge that you reach, and it's a little bit different than everything that you do before that. So let's zoom in a bit here. You can see I'm using a train station to move the material, and I have two pairs of buildings that I have set up here. And I tend to start out this way just because of how all of the numbers work out. These facilities, there's two buildings that work together in tandem. The first building, this low building here, produces aluminum scrap and then feeds that under the concrete deck into the taller structure that you see there, which takes the aluminum scrap as well as some copper and makes one of two things. The left half builds all-clad aluminum sheet, and the right pair of buildings builds aluminum casings. Those are kind of the two products that you need that feed several other things that you're going to build from them. You can't really do a lot from aluminum ingot itself. Generally you need the all-clad aluminum sheet, which is aluminum and copper, or you need the casings, both of which will require you to add copper into the mix. But before we can even get to that, we have to get to the aluminum ingot itself. So what do we need for that? Let's take a look at some of the recipes. This will give us an idea of what's going on. So in order to make aluminum ingots, kind of the first product that we're shooting for, the default recipe uses aluminum scrap and silica to make aluminum ingots. However, when I first unlock access to aluminum, what I typically do, and the way I operate in this game in general, I hold back the researchable hard drives that you find out in the world, which provide you alternate recipes. I let them build up until I unlock a new tier or a new resource, and then I use those hard drives and research those hard drives to try and unlock alternate recipes that I like. One of them is the pure aluminum ingot. It takes aluminum scrap and turns it directly into an aluminum ingot and does not require silica in the process. Just my preference, I prefer to eliminate incoming material needs as much as possible to simplify train lines and production lines. It just makes everything a little bit easier for me. You can build it however you like, of course. So that's how we get that, but we need to now talk about how do we get aluminum scrap. Well, aluminum scrap by default comes from two components, alumina solution and coal, and produces the aluminum scrap we need, but also has a byproduct of water. This is one of the things that makes aluminum processing such a challenge, is that we get water as a byproduct, and that water is not easily disposed of in this game. Fluids are very hard to dispose of. We can dispose of solids very easily because we have the fix-it sink, which literally will just eat it and convert it into coupons for us to use. But when it comes to fluids, you have to turn that into a solid somehow, or you have to reuse it. And I'll show you how we reuse that in just a minute. So this refinery would be used to take these two components and produce these two. There are some alternates for aluminum scrap that you can use. I personally do not like either of these because they don't do a lot for me other than complicate the process. This is not coal, it's petroleum coke, so that requires oil effectively to be in the mix. So now instead of coal, we would have oil producing petroleum coke, so we'd have other refineries producing the petroleum coke. I don't like that recipe for that reason. This one introduces sulfuric acid, so now we need sulfur and water combined in order to make sulfuric acid. This just overcomplicates it, and I realize there's some efficiency differences here, but I prefer the simplicity. I find that simplicity is more enjoyable for me. So I use the default recipe for aluminum scrap. But we still have this step. How do we get alumina solution? Let's take a look at that one. Here you can see for alumina solution, the default is bauxite, which is just mineable from the ground, combined with water, gives us alumina solution, and silica. Now, if we're using the base recipes, we could just feed that silica back towards the end of the production chain and use it to make the ingots. But we're hoping to not have to use silica at all because we'd still have to supplement. There wouldn't be enough here. So we could just turn this into a waste product and put it through the fix-it sink and be done with it. But we could also take a look at this alternate recipe. This is one that I use, which takes bauxite and water, just like the base formula, and outputs the alumina solution, but has no byproduct of silica. This is the one that I go for. Still uses a refinery. It's basically the same. It just doesn't make the byproduct, and the outputs are slightly different. It also provides a recipe that has very similar numbers, which makes for a nice little production line, and I'll show you that in a bit. So remember, the ultimate goal, though, is to get to those ingots and then eventually get to either aluminum casings or alkyd aluminum sheets. But that's kind of the next stage of the whole process. So for now, let's just talk about getting to our aluminum scrap, and then we'll go from there. So we talked about all the different materials we need. We don't need silica because by using alt recipes, we've effectively skipped that whole step. As you can see here, there's a train pulling in, and this is actually my bauxite line. I am starved a bit for bauxite right now. That's what I was talking about earlier, where I need to expand a little bit. And I'm still using Mark V belts. I haven't unlocked Mark VI yet, which means any miner is ultimately limited to 780 parts per minute. And these facilities effectively each want 800 bauxite. So this small lower building takes about 800 bauxite and processes that into scrap, and the taller building consumes all of that. So because I am underserved by the two pier nodes that I have access to that the trains are going to get right now, that means we're effectively short. Each one of these sets of buildings is short by 20 bauxite per minute. I accept that as a weakness in the initial build, because once I get Mark VI belts, then each extractor can pull 1600, all the conveyor belts can be upgraded, all the lifts can be upgraded, and they can all handle a much higher throughput, and the whole problem just goes away just because I've upgraded. And in fact, because we'll have so much more input at that point, I'll be able to build a third pair of buildings. Because of the way my production chains work, I could actually use more aluminum casings. And that's essentially what this second pair of buildings is doing. I kind of need another one. For now, we'll just starve a bit and deal with it. So you can see here, we've got our bauxite, we've got our coal, and we have copper ore all going in down here into this little walkway. It stays underneath the concrete deck here and feeds into the building that's going to make aluminum scrap. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on inside. So inside this building, there's kind of two different distinct processes happening. It's going to be a little hard to see. I'm actually going to go outside briefly because you can actually see it through the windows in the roof pretty well. You can see here that there's a set of refineries, these two and these two, that are connected, and there's a water extractor in the middle, and that's kind of one production line. And then there's another one here. So we're going to focus just on one of those production lines because that includes the processing of all the recipes that we're talking about. In this first phase, we're going for making our alumina solution, which is taking in bauxite and water. When the train isn't backed up, it's taking bauxite anyway. I'm actually a little bit stretched thin here. This production line wants essentially 400 bauxite per minute, and this building essentially then needs 800, but I can only move 780 right now. So it's a little bit starved for bauxite. but I like to build it this way because once I get to the Mark 6 conveyor and I can move 1200, then 3 buildings ends up being a very smooth process. So these two need water and bauxite. Now initially, of course, we also have our water extractor, and this doesn't have to be in the middle, by the way. This could actually be down at that end or anywhere. It's actually plumbed in underneath the floor and actually connects back here. I'll talk about that in a minute. But just for aesthetics, really, I wanted it in the middle in this little sump pit because I thought it looked kind of neat. So these two are producing the aluminum solution. The aluminum solution follows down this pipe and connects into these refineries. The aluminum solution is then mixed with coal to make scrap and a byproduct of water. And this is where it starts to get a little tricky. So we're pulling in our coal right here, again from under the floor, and back out at the train station. So we have two refineries producing what we'll call wastewater, and it's not enough. You can see here each one's producing 120. It's not enough to satisfy the needs of these two refineries. These two refineries each want 200 each. So we're short. We are short by 160 per minute of water, so we do need a water extractor to assist the process. Now you may have seen some other videos where some people will take their water extractor and just run kind of a high bend and connect to the top of a splitter onto the top of the pipe, and with the understanding that a higher connection takes lower priority in a pipe system. I personally do not like that system because it will still seize up. You see, the problem is that if we completely fill with water and these machines can't get rid of their wastewater, then they stop processing, and if they stop processing, then the aluminum solution backs up, and then these two can't process the bauxite into aluminum solution. And then the whole thing comes to a grinding halt. You have to basically consume this water, either by feeding it back into the original and then supplementing, or there's some other fancy tricks. If you bring in concrete, you can make wet concrete. Limestone. Bring in limestone, mix that with water with a recipe, and you can make what's called wet concrete, and then you can just sink it in order to ensure that the production line continues. Some other tricks that you can try if you're having problems is to take your aluminum scrap or the final product out the far end and sink that in an overflow through a smart splitter just to make sure that the line continues and never stops, and that can be a little smoother. However, if you just take the extra water from the extractor and you attach it to the very end of that pipe that's going to feed all the way through, what happens is there's also, within a pipe system, there's an understanding of prioritization in that these two want the water, and they will pull water from this tank and from this pipe and from the first producer. So they're going to pull from this refinery's wastewater and then this refinery's wastewater before they pull from the pump that's coming up through the floor here. I did put a valve on here, by the way, just to restrict it to 160, just to prevent any kind of pipe surging from the pump. But it's not necessary. I found that really didn't seem to do much. The trick here is that depending on what stops first, for whatever reason, you can end up with this entire pipe filling with water if you're not sinking everything at some point in the process. And it's okay if your extra water, your supplemental water, actually comes in from the end of this connection. It will stop and restart just fine without any additional assistance because it's going to prioritize taking the wastewater out of the aluminum scrap process first before it pulls it from the pump. Now, if these shut down, the pump will continue to fill this pipe and fill up this buffer as well, but that's okay. And this buffer, I will also say, is optional. I like it because I like to have something I can come to and look at the level, and I was also seeing if I could play with some tricks by making the water extractor so much lower, trying to play with head lift so that it would stop filling the fluid buffer before it was full. and unfortunately the height differential would have to be even higher for that to work. And also sometimes the extractors or the refineries actually fill it up, you know, depending on what's happening on the other end. In my case, because I'm starved for bauxite a little bit, you can see the bauxite comes in right here, and we're currently out of bauxite. So these guys are still producing a little bit of scrap with what they had, and they also can fill that fluid buffer, which is okay if you're using this kind of a setup where you feed it in from the end, your accessory water, and the wastewater is pulled first. So this is one of the more unusual setups you'll have to deal with. And there's a couple of other ways that you can do this, but this is the way that I choose to do it. 4 refineries, 1 water extractor, and a couple of alt recipes kind of gives me everything I need to get that material into the next building. And when it comes out, it just goes down onto the floor and goes into the next facility. So let's go ahead and take a look at what do we do with that scrap. So you may have seen in some of my other videos this kind of factory stacked blueprints. I'll just show you that real quick. You can see that this entire multi-floor structure and the one above it and then the one above that and the one at the very top are all actually blueprints. Those are the Giletier Industries factory stacks, and you can find those available on the Satisfactory calculator website, which I will leave in the description. So these facilities take that scrap and are going to produce aluminum ingots as their first step. So you can see here, there's a smelter, we're taking in aluminum scrap, and we're making aluminum ingots. The ingots, then you get to decide after that, after combining it with copper ingots, you can produce either all-clad aluminum sheet, or you can produce the aluminum casings. And depending on how you do it, you either need to make sheets first, or with an alt recipe, you don't. So these blueprints just provide a pre-built way to put in a whole bunch of smelters with floors under and floors above for various conveyance, and provide a convenient way to quickly build a factory. You can see them taking in all the scrap here, and they'll be producing the aluminum ingots on the very, very top level. Up here, you can also see the copper actually being passed through because we don't process that here. That goes into the next area. But right here, we can actually see our ingots coming out and then heading up to the next floor above. So there are other ways to process aluminum, but this is the way that I have found that works for me. It's a somewhat repeatable process, that's why I like it the most, and it's fairly small, just requiring 4 refineries and a water extractor. One other note I wanted to mention, if you didn't notice when I shared it earlier, in order to get 160 per minute out of a single water extractor, you do need to overclock. No problem, no big deal from my perspective, but you could also just use 2 water extractors and plumb them together and then connect it to the very end of that water connection, and that would work just fine as well. It would just take up a little more space. I do not currently have the aluminum scrap facility blueprinted yet. Once mods are available and I can get a larger blueprint space, then I will put together that blueprint for my use, and also we'll get that uploaded so anyone can take that and use it. There will be some challenges with it in the sense that water extractors you generally can't get placed easily in a blueprint, so that'll have to be left out, but the majority of everything else could be all connected and at least somewhat repeatable quickly. So that's all I've got. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.